Okay, off we go. So, still collecting people here. Myself and my colleague Sarah, who you should see there, are going to be hosting and facilitating today's session. And I'm from the SI Network. I founded it some 8 years ago, and I've been doing a lot of teaching around systems thinking and complexity theory and how that applies in many different areas. I've had many conversations with people working in, philanthropy and foundations about what this means to them, because a lot of people do see the need for this, and the recognition that we need to really be thinking differently if we want philanthropy and foundations to be, a force for systems innovation and systems change. So I've gathered a few ideas and picked up a little idea of what's going on there as I've been going along. I've also got my colleague Sarah, who's going to be co-host and picking up questions and helping in other ways as we go along. The purpose today, as mentioned, is to work together on applying these ideas of systems thinking towards generating new insights and approaches to philanthropy and charity that are better suited for the kind of systemic and complex challenges we face today. And that's what we're here for. It's a little bit how it's going to play out. A few minutes intro. I'm going to do a little icebreaker now, ask you some questions. We're going to get introduced to our coaches. So we have three great people with us today who are going to help animate and guide the conversation. And we'll get introduced to them. We're going to look at the challenge, a little bit of a framing. What are we talking about here? Why do we need to do this? Why do we need to change thinking? And we're going to look at the workshop board to get an understanding of how that works. So most of the session will be in this 90 minutes. We're working on that mirror board. And just to give you a preview of what that looks like, it's this big board over here. So that's where we're going to be for most of the session, and then a little wrap up at the end and talk about next steps. So hopefully that's what you're expecting. We always like to try and connect people at any given opportunity because we're a network. Encourage you to jump in here and maybe put in your name and your LinkedIn so that you can find others and they can find you and you can connect. And here's a little icebreaker question for you. Would love to know what area you're working in or what brings you here today, really. What are you interested in this whole application of systems thinking to philanthropy and charities? So we get to get insight as to, what areas you're working around and what interests you here. So hopefully you got the mirror board. I'll put that in the chat again. Yep, I will do. And if you're new to Mirror, you just follow, excuse me, little alarm. But if you're new to Mirror, just follow the link, jump into the Mirror board, and you get a sticky by clicking on the side here and drop that down, and then you type away, and you can scale it up or down, or use one of the ones that's already on the board here. Just double click on it, and you'll be able to type away. So we'll just take a couple of minutes, 1-2 minutes to do that, so as we get an idea of who's in the room here already. And I encourage you as we go through today's session, the next 2 hours, to try and really engage and make the most of the conversation. It'd be great if you could switch on your videos and yeah, post up whatever ideas you have as we go along. If you have any technical issues or problems, just put them in the chat there. Okay, while you're filling those out and we're still collecting people, just to get a sense of who's in the room. Service design, strategic designer, background in evaluation and research. We've recently been working with some founders, some funders on theory of change. My background is in charity and philanthropy organizations, and I've often thought the broader ecosystem was flawed. Working in charity sector, very interested in supporting a move from linear solutions to systems and innovation, systems thinking and innovation. Have been working in the charity sector for many years and interested in thinking could help be more impactful and effective, systemic design for new products, services, and businesses, rethinking deteriorated economic models, currently exploring systems thinking approaches for a private initiative of public service media. Great. AI governance, collective wisdom, Renaissance, effective altruism. All right, redesigning, reimagining money. Interested in bioregional systemic finance. Okay, I'll leave you to stay posting there. Maybe we'll come back afterwards. And we've got all our profiles up here. So great if you want to click through and connect with other people. And just to, I mentioned our coaches. These are going to be people who are going to be engaging in the conversation as we go along. They're people who have been working in and around philanthropy and for charities for some time. And they're going to be helping us on our journey. So just want to quickly get introduced there. Maybe we'll start with Alan, if you'd like to say hello and a few words.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Josh. Nice to see everybody. Yeah, so my name's Alan. I'm based in Brighton. I've worked in the global development space for 30 years with a focus on governance and democracy, anti-corruption, poverty, and the use of public resources. Over the last 10 years, that's had a kind of my work has had a more explicit focus on adaptive, learning-centered, and locally led approaches to addressing complex social challenges. I've been a freelance consultant for the last 18 months, exploring two related questions. Firstly, what is the nature of complex social challenges, and how does change happen in relation to such challenges? And secondly, what sorts of approaches or ways of being can support effective engagement with complex social challenges? So in practice, this has involved working with people and organizations who are trying to address such challenges and helping them to think through and develop the capacities and skills they need to address those sorts of challenges. As one example, I've been working with a particular foundation, one with a global reach and a focus on governance and democracy, as they have explored what it might look like to be an ecosystems funder and what challenges, opportunities, and creative tensions that might present. So this is clearly a growing conversation. I've collated lots of resources on the topic that I'm happy to share. So I'm very much looking forward to today and seeing what interesting ideas for learning and action come out of the discussion. That's all from me.
Great, thanks, Al. We'll hear more from Al as we go along and hope to unpack some of those. Your approaches and ways of being that are appropriate for working with complexity. I'm intrigued what we mean by ways of being, but hopefully we hear that as we go along. So Didiana, do you want to say a word of introduction?
Very happy to. Thanks, Joss, and really great to be here. Loving seeing all of the stories and what brings people here in the areas of work. So I'm Didiana. I also go by D. As a full human introduction, before I go into professional introduction, I'm from Bulgaria originally. I'm calling from Wales currently, and in between Wales and Bulgaria, there seem to be 4 countries over the past 15 years. And growing up in post-communist Bulgaria in the 90s, I grew fascinating with really big questions around nature, society, local, global intersections. And I guess these big questions, this fascination has taken me on a very interdisciplinary journey, starting with academia. Initially, it's academia that brought me into different countries and contexts. And then the past 9 years working in 3 very different international nonprofits with focus areas around nature conservation, movement building, and reimagining, redesigning the global economy. And I think in that journey as a full human going into international nonprofits, I've been very externally focused on how we change the external reality. And I'm very curious about the ways of being, Alan, because I think my latest journey of learning and unlearning has been very much around the inner landscape, the inner development, both within myself, within the organizations that I've been working in, how that is related to the big complex challenges that we come together collectively to try to solve. I think unlearning is probably my biggest kind of keyword of the journey I've been on over the past few months and years. And I bring very deep curiosity into this conversation and very, very interested to see what emerges from this discussion, this workshop.
It's good we pick up on that point, because we're going to talk a lot about ideas, aren't we, and kind of models and approaches, but behind those are kind of ways of being and ways of showing up, should we say, and ways of relating. So it's good that we keep all that in mind. Thanks a lot, Diana. So Sine, would you like to say a word of introduction?
Hi, thanks, Joss, and thank you for the session today. I'm really looking forward to it and an invitation to today. So I'm Sine Rina-Keric, and I am currently a strategy and impact lead at NCVO, which is the National Council for Voluntary Organizations. But I started my kind of career as a policy researcher and evaluator, where I used to work with a lot of central government and local governments and trusts and foundations, mainly to kind of explore and understand what kind of interventions work in the area of social and economic policy. I then kind of moved to work more in the international development sector, and kind of quite a niche area again, keeping that theme of understanding what works and focusing on looking at the policy advocacy and influencing work of international development organizations and coalitions of charities in terms of kind of engaging with and supporting the government and international institutions in policymaking, like the likes of the UN, the SDG goals, etc. And kind of human rights campaigns, that kind of things. And over the past 6 years, I've been with NCVO. So we are the National Council for Voluntary Organizations, and those that don't know much about NCVO, so we're England-based, focusing, supporting charities and voluntary organizations in England. So there are 17,000 members that we have, but there are in fact 160,000 odd charities and voluntary organizations in the UK, so quite a few, which is fascinating. Also, like I was not born in the UK, I was born in Finland, where the society is structured quite differently. So it's quite interesting to look at those different systems and look from the perspective of the policymaker, as well as this perspective of charities and voluntary organizations. And I think, you know, my kind of interest is kind of thinking another way as well, in terms of, you know, what can the charity sector give to others, because, you know, they have a role as an advocate for those that need a voice, and perhaps watchdogs to keep decision makers into account, and also the role as a kind of connecting people and creating a sense of community. And these are kind of things that sometimes are not mentioned because it's all about money. So I'm kind of really interested to hear and learn from you all about, you know, where do you see charities and voluntary sector within this system, and charitable giving as well.
So you're quite grounded in kind of the reality of all these charities, right? And as you say, a lot of them are quite small and struggling.
They're tiny.
Yeah. So just to pick up on why do you think we need systems approaches, or what do you think this can really bring? What stands out for you?
Well, in terms of systems, well, it's I think, you know, you need to have joint forces, and I think looking at the UK, because I work in the policy, I've always been interested in social impact, and that social impact support seems to be happening in the charity sector more than what it used to be. So there is this kind of strange situation now where we don't know, you know, what is the actual role of the sector and charitable giving, and how they, as being really tiny and small organization, can have this systemic impact. And, you know, from my perspective, there is a need for that kind of wider partnership, being around the table with the bigger decision makers and those that have the power, because they're great ideas in these small pockets in our grassroots.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay. Great to have you joining, Dee, Sydney, Alan. Let's jump in. And just to frame things a little bit before we jump into the workshop, what are we talking about here? We're talking about philanthropy and charity, and that's about the act of giving resources to help people for the benefit of public good, for the support of those in need, and also for recognition. I'm sure there's a few different motives kind of caught up in why we do this. And the way this has evolved over the past 100 years or so, has kind of adopted a lot of our kind of modern practices for how we do management, and how we organize, based a lot on kind of reductionist thinking and practices about how the world works and how we make change happen. Under this paradigm, the giving economy has scaled to become a huge industry. Right? We've talked about hundreds of thousands of non-for-profits, charities, and some really huge foundations and donors and so forth. And its scale has an incredible scale, tackling all sorts of challenges, environmental, social, and economic. However, in the face of ever more complex challenges, there are certain limitations to this approach that we see in other types of we see the limitations in other types of organizations too when it comes to dealing with complexity. That reductionism often leaves us in scenarios like this. It creates a lot of boxes for us. But when the world comes quite complex and challenges become quite complex, those boxes can become very much misaligned with the nature of reality and the problem we're trying to address. And they may not help us in the way that they did in the past. While ever more money gets channeled into ever more organizations and programs, it is questionable whether an approach that divides problems up and separates them out to fix each one in separation is appropriate for the interdependent and complex nature of these systemic challenges. If you wish to channel these resources towards more systemic kinds of change, new kinds of thinking and organizing will clearly be needed. A different kind of paradigm, a very different way of organizing from the one that we've adopted over the past 100 years or so. An approach that recognizes that much needed change will not come about through one organization, program, or initiative, but requires ecosystem level coordination and collaboration. What is needed is an approach that is better informed by an understanding of complex systems and how they work. One that's able to see and work with whole ecosystems of actors instead of funneling all our resources into finding the winners that will solve the problem. For this, new types of funding models and collaborative networks need to be developed. It requires new models and approaches to attribution. It requires new ways of assessing, approaches that are aware of the dynamics of emergent processes, something we kind of struggle with a lot, that focuses on systems health rather than fixes and specific outcomes. It requires an approach that's suited to working with complexity in uncertain environments, approaches that move away from fixed planning to more adaptive, iterative, and experimental forms. An approach that embraces innovation and learning as core elements to making sustainable long-term progress on wicked challenges. That's just a few words about some of the kind of what we mean by this changing paradigm and a new approach if we really want to embrace and work with complexity. And that's really the only way that we're going to be able to change complex systems if we start to kind of deal with the nature of that reality. And that's what this workshop's constructed around. We're going to take the ideas from systems thinking, and systems thinking is obviously about trying to help us work with complexity and apply them to deriving new insights. So we've taken a canvas from SI, and it's 4 main big ideas in systems thinking that are going to help us try and shift from a more reductionist to a more systems thinking paradigm. On the top left here, we can see a movie away from kind of a partial view to a more holistic view. Over here, we're going to try and shift from more linear approaches to thinking about emergence and seeing patterns in the system as created by self-organization. We're going to talk about moving from a kind of disconnected approach to a more networked and connected paradigm. And finally, over here, we're going to be talking about moving away, as I mentioned, from kind of a static, fixed kind of planning approach to change to one that's more adaptive, iterative, and evolutionary. And that's how today's workshop is organized. You can see the 4 main sections broken out there. And there's a series of questions on each one. And we're going to be spending about 25 minutes in each section. You're going to be posting up your ideas. The coaches will then discuss those ideas with you before we move on to the next section. And we can zoom in then, just to get started on this first section. It's all about moving from a partial approach. We talk about individual organizations and individual programs and individual, even though we categorize the nature of the challenge, these individual problems, and trying to shift to a more holistic view of things. How about we adopt a more holistic ecosystem approach for accounting for and supporting all dimensions required to create thriving communities and systems that are able to self-organize and build resilience to address their own challenges. And you'll see as we go along here, there are these cards, maybe you've seen them at SI, they're kind of key concepts in systems and complexity theory. So they're going to help you and hopefully inspire you to take the ideas here and then apply them to this challenge that we have at hand. And you'll see there's 5 questions, 5 cards, 5 questions there. And I'd encourage you to look at the questions. We're going to all work together now. We'll be in this main room. We'll take about 12 to 15 minutes for you to jump in here, take a look at the cards, take a look at the questions. I'll flick through them quickly now. And for then you to post up your ideas to that, and we'll come back afterwards with the coaches and we'll look at those ideas. So down here is the idea of reflexivity. We actually need to take account of ourselves in this whole equation and our way of looking at the world and way of showing up. So how can an understanding of reflexivity shape how we do things in charity? How could we better work with an understanding of multiple perspectives to create synergies instead of conflictual dynamics? Maybe you've seen this graphic before. Probably describes a lot of what we're talking about here. Most complex challenges kind of find themselves in this sort of scenario. How could this kind of understanding inform a new way of doing philanthropy and charity? Looking at different dimensions, how can we use fractal thinking to integrate across multiple levels? And finally here about synthesis. How could an approach that synthesizes up instead of analyzing down help us? So there we have it. Hopefully you're able to find where I am at the stage, top left of this board. And we're going to set the timer now. We'll take, say, 13 minutes for you to read through those cards, have a think about the questions, and post up your responses to them. If you have any questions, you can ask them now. You can post them in the chat also. I'm going to set a timer here and off we go. Okay, so just setting our timer here, we'll put 12 minutes. As mentioned, any questions, put them into the chat. Hopefully what we're doing, we're working on top left section here. We're reading through the the questions and the ideas on the cards, and then we're trying to take those ideas, ideas about holism, ideas around reflexivity, synthesis, and so forth, and we're trying to think how could those be applied to actually rethinking how we go about doing giving, philanthropy, charity, and think about new approaches to that. So off we go. Great. Well done, everyone, for contributing. And we got some a lot of interesting stuff going on here. And I'll pass it over to our coaches to pick out what they found interesting, maybe have a bit of a conversation with you. Diliana, would you like to start, or are you still doing your dot voting? Shall I pass on to Alan? Or...
I literally just started allocating the dots because I was going to wait until the end of the everyone stopped posting.
No worries. I can start with Alan. Alan, would you like to jump in and think interesting you found?
Yeah, happy to do so. Thanks, Josh. Thanks, everybody. What a rich set of contributions on the board. Quite hard to make sense of them and synthesize them on the fly, but there's lots of interesting things. Some things that I picked out I was particularly interested in, and maybe the person who wrote the post-it might like to kind of expand on it, and then we can see how the conversation goes. So in the around the dimensionality cluster, there was what was to me a very interesting thing about living systems. If I can find where that is. So it says embracing living systems principles at the individual, team, division, organizational. To hear a bit more about what was behind that comment. I'll just mention one other thing, and then this was particularly around the cluster around perspectives. There were quite a lot.
Should we do one at a time, Alan?
Okay.
Maybe? Yeah, because you get another chance. It's just
All right.
it'd be great to hear from this person, right? Anybody want to chat on this?
Yeah. Hi. Sorry, I can say a few words. There's a bit of background noise outside. Yeah, I mean, I can post more resources on this living systems principles idea, but I guess the main idea that I had here was to say what would happen if we embrace the same principles within ourselves, in our teams, in our whole division of the foundation, in the whole organization, as we apply it to the outside world. So basically model the behavior that we want to see in the outside world, not just in ourselves, but also in our own organization and so on, so that we become a fractal ourselves for what we want to see in the world, and therefore foster it as a kind of manifestation in a small scale, and then translate it into the larger scales.
Great. Do you want to pick up anything there, Alan? Or maybe should I stay going?
What sorts of principles do you have in mind, Leon? Are you able to say anything about that? I know that's a big question.
Again, I think I'm just going to post some like a visual here, maybe. But there's this obviously this wheel of living systems principles that people might be familiar with, and I guess it's best if I just post that here. But yeah, it's like about relationality and embracing life in its purest form, and going back to those foundational principles that we kind of abstracted from and distance ourselves too much from in our modern world. I'll post it here as well.
Cool, thank you, very helpful. I'll pass on to Dee or Sini.
Happy to come in. I've used all of my dots now. And one of them was actually on the same one that you highlighted, Alan. I also want to really, I'm really blown away by all of the energy and like the really insightful and deep comments already emerging. I really want to honor the concentration convergence that I'm seeing already by participants. So I see the post that it has several, yes, 1,000%, 100%. It's under the holism card around recognizing the role charity has played since the enclosures to give power to the wealthy. And lots of different colors of post-its and links have emerged around that. So I would invite anyone who was around this cluster, whether you posted that original post-it or gave it 100%, to give us a bit more color of what is hiding behind that post-it. If you feel comfortable, of course.
Who is the founder of this sticky?
It's me, Brett.
Great.
Hi, Brett.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to point out this notion that kind of questioning, before we jump into how can we make the existing process work better for more people? Even just acknowledging and naming the origin of the charity sector, you know, in medieval times, really. I mean, it used to be the church that took care of the poor because the landowners were, you know, concentrating wealth and money and resources. And so just being honest with ourselves. And during the Victorian times, it was really clear this is the role of charity, you know. And there have been some wins in the 20th century, getting more resources from the state that make a more equal and a whole life approach. But this is being dismantled now. I mean, the same logics prevail. The philanthropists can save us. I think even that writer in the United States who's such a radical even made a book once, you know, the philanthropists have to save us. I mean, this is his limited thinking. Ralph Nader. Anyway, that's it. That's the origin of that.
Right. Thanks for that, Brett. I mean, I guess there's a lot you could say there too, isn't there, about how a lot of these philanthropies initially came about, right, and where they got the money from, and so forth. But maybe we'll stay going. We'll move on to Vinay. Would you like to pick up on one? You're on mute. You're on mute. Yeah.
I got two screens. I got stuck on the other one. Yeah, really interesting point. That point there you just made, and I think I was kind of referring to that as well and I think Dee as well. You know, when you've been in different systems as well, it is quite interesting. The power in general, power then, power now, and the importance of recognizing it. I might go, actually, there were a couple of kind of co-creation or kind of working together, collaborative places. Sorry, now I've got so intently listening to what he was saying there, I lost the point. So maybe that one here, there, and I thought it was funny that maybe it needs a revolution there next to this point as well. So it'll be really interesting to hear perhaps from both of those people, maybe it's the same person. So it's the point, sorry, the next, it's kind of, oh goodness, how do I, that one there that you just had your cursor on, yeah. So the new ways to convene stakeholders so that there are this, you know, I suppose it's linked to the previous comment about the power and first of all, recognizing the power and then leveraging that power. And then that note that is there next to it saying probably needs the revolution. So I don't know who would like who was writing those two notes. It'll be interesting to have a bit of a debate, perhaps. Tiny one.
So yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I was the person who said this is going to need a revolution. I don't know who the person was who kind of put the original thing out there. In a world where 8 people own nearly half the world's wealth, you know, how on earth do we reconvene stakeholders when people's interests are so wildly conflicting? And you know, people are so clearly unwilling to give up their own power, that, you know, there isn't a peaceful, I don't think there's a peaceful way to do this. I don't think there's ever been a peaceful way to do this. I don't think we've ever, unless someone can correct me, I don't think I've ever seen progressive change happen without some form of revolution and some form of ultimately violent revolution. You know, there may be some pockets where that's changed, perhaps gay marriage, perhaps a smoking ban, but on the big ticket items, I don't think I've ever seen the kind of change we're looking for happen without some kind of fairly dramatic revolution.
So, I mean, going back to the question, because I'm kind of trying to keep to the question as well, how might we rethink philanthropy and charity within the systems thinking? I don't know if that was the kind of response to that. What the person who wrote the other the initial post.
Yeah, it's me again. I hate to say
All right.
it's me. So
I
I'm
didn't
not,
realize that we just
you
have
got my, yeah, it's just the idea of how to maybe bring a change in by making more convening practices that bring people together that are affected by issues, and let them have a greater role in identifying solutions than top-down policy wonks and analysts and prerogatives of funders and their interests, however well-meaning they may be. They're still defining the solutions and the results they want. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. I mean, it's really about the system, isn't it? The kind of structure within which we play this game, and that's set up in a particular way. And actually, if we wanted very different outcomes, it's that whole kind of the way people are coming together, the way people are relating, and the way this kind of game is being played that's kind of gets the same results, doesn't it? And you'd have to really revisit that, which would get to the thing of power, and it's set up in a way that's kind of maybe reflective of the underlying power. And if you really wanted to change it, you might have to kind of unpack that to really change how these people are coming together, and thus what they can potentially do together, right? It's probably as long as they're in this structure, they can only do these certain things. It's not until you really question that you could get something quite different. Okay, maybe we'll come back to you, Alan. Any final ones you want to pick up on here?
Yeah, I'm always super interested in questions about power, and not only about whether systems thinking can help to understand power dynamics, but whether and how it can help to address and change power dynamics. Some of my work is about corruption, so that seems to be quite a kind of hard case of that. But one thing I wanted to pick up under reflexivity was somebody put a post-it which said about moving systems thinking from a buzzword or a specific discipline to a normal daily practice. That really appeals. I like the sound of that. I would like the person who added that post-it to maybe share a bit more. It was Tim, apparently, Tim Kirby, to share a bit more about what was on your mind when you put that, and what you think of how normal daily practice of systems thinking might look like.
Yeah, so I think what I've seen from a lot of my work, both in systems thinking and also systems engineering and building systems, is a lot of the time systems thinking, if you look in, say, government and policy, it's almost seen as something that other people do. It's a buzzword that comes in. People say we want to do this. I had my wife this morning saying that she was hearing it a lot in financial services where she works, and no one really kind of could actually put the meat to it and say what it was. And I think we're seeing a lot of that in general, that it's not been embedded in a practice. We're not teaching these things in universities as well. I teach in 2 Scottish universities, and I'm really trying to change this to become a sort of general skill, initially in engineering, but also in other disciplines like healthcare, because I see this in industry that people aren't thinking in the right ways to actually understand the impacts outside the silo that they're working in themselves. And I think that ability to apply even just some of the most basic systems thinking concepts is almost lost on people a lot of the time. And we need to look at how we change that in our education systems, particularly. Get children from primary schools upwards starting to think about problems rather than solutions, as we encourage a lot of the creativity. And we need to actually bring in that understanding around that sort of problem thinking, looking outside the area that you work in and understanding all those different perspectives. And I think that's by moving it into a normal practice that you shouldn't even be thinking about systems thinking would be my end goal in many years' time, probably, to get there. But I think it should just be something that people do. And unfortunately, it's not at the moment.
Thank you, Tim. Very helpful. Just one thing to add to that is that so Toby Lowe, who is very much involved in the Human Learning Systems Initiative, which some of you might be aware of, is thinking about exactly that question that Tim raises about what it would take to make systems thinking, particularly thinking about complex adaptive systems kind of a daily practice for more people, so that they don't, it would be kind of ingrained in some people's DNA to think about things in terms of relationships and power and learning. So thank you very much for that, Tim.
Thank you.
Oh, Joss, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I was just, Danae, would you like to, or Diana, like pick up any last points before we move on? We've got a lot of interesting stuff going on here. We've got the world of wicked problems. We've got, I think this is Circle, the gentleman referred to, about living systems principles. We've also got the inner development goals down here. Interesting. I wonder how they'd relate. And well, certainly a tree of wicked challenges, wicked problems. Any last comments, Sine or Tatiana? Should we move on?
I love it all. I wanted to pick up on the last point, Tim. I had also really liked the post about training all employees of the funding organization on what it means to be a funder in this world. And for someone who entered nonprofit sector straight out of uni, there was also something about a grant receiving charity, what it means to be in that transfer space in the world, and how we embrace that role, and how is a transition role, and is the society we're trying to co-create and co-shape a society where charity is not needed and there's no role, kind of going back to the history of that. So something around, I think that really hit home for me, of like, how do we actually come to terms of the ways of being entering that nonprofit sector, not fully appreciating what that role is and how we bring people on that journey. And that's even beyond systems thinking. When you apply the systems thinking, it's a lot easier to grasp this. So I imagine that this training for employees really touches on the ability to see the systematic, holistic view of that. But curious, what?
Yeah, I think it's going to lead to transformation, real transformational change, isn't there? Some of us here maybe had the Lankelly Chase Foundation were planning to close down after many years funding, and still had a lot of money left, and dissolve that because they felt that the whole paradigm was wrong, what they were doing, which is interesting. So I think systems thinking is going to lead to real something that looks like that, real transformation. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think, yeah, it probably should have died, but it should have been reborn again in some fashion, right? That would have been my thinking around it. But I think it's going to lead to some kind of transformation like that, where we really reflect on the nature of what we're talking about there, how people are showing up, and the power dynamics and the history, right? I think Lankelly Chase quoted, the way philanthropy and foundation is being done at the moment is a kind of legacy of colonialism and so forth. Here in the UK, right? It's different around the world, and that's partly what they're objecting to. That goes to the history aspects and power dynamics and so forth. So I think it's going to be the kind of two loops thing. It's really going to die if there's going to be that transformation. The paradigm that we know is really probably a lot of it's going to have to die and be born in quite, I would say, radical ways. Hopefully not too much violent revolution, but let's stay going for the moment. We're on to the second section. Yep.
Sorry, just kind of quickly wanted to add to that it is interesting, looking at from the charities perspective as well, because of course there are charities who also have, they kind of, if you think something like Trussell's Trust, they don't want to exist. Their strategic aim is to stop from being existing, that they're not needed anymore, because they want to change the system. They don't want society to have food banks, for example. But it is then it becomes difficult when you're kind of relying the way the funding is structured at the moment, and way the whole system, the charity system, is set up, that it is actually perhaps quite challenging to have that kind of strategy when you still want to function.
Yeah, well, I think
and deliver your mission.
I think it's core to like what innovation is about, isn't it? That you're trying to do yourself out of a job. Really, you're trying to find a way to do this, that you'll no longer really be needed here. But I was talking to someone last week, and one of the things they said, just if it was natural, is that, well, every organization transitions towards you know, supporting itself, looking after itself, as opposed to doing its function. And they took that as just given, it was natural. And that made me think, and same for every organization, that Russell Ackoff talks about that, you know, universities aren't really set up to teach students, they're organized around the professors, and, you know, businesses are organized around the top management and the, you know, their lifestyle and so forth. So I think it's similar for many types of organizations and exists in this context also. So thanks a lot for that. Well done so far. Let's stay going. And we're here on the second section where we're going to try and move away from linear thinking, this cause and effects, and people have mentioned it already, and think more about emergent. And a tricky idea, but how can philanthropy and charities move towards becoming stewards and systems gardeners, working to enable the emergence of beneficial outcomes? So it's moving away from this kind of thinking on the left here. We're kind of reducing down to specific problems. We have a complex system and it's a bit overwhelming for us and we aren't really able to embrace it. So we try and reduce it down to some specific problem and search for the causes and kind of do analysis and then try and fix the problem in that way. When really we're looking for, someone mentioned it recently on LinkedIn, what we're trying to do is create these autopoietic systems, is what they said. You're not trying to fix problems, you're trying to make the system so that it can regenerate itself and it can look after itself and we can get emergence of the beneficial outcomes. Quite a different way of looking at things. And would love to know what you people can come up with here. So just a few prompts here. Obviously, one big idea there is around self-organization. How might we better integrate self-organization into how we see our job as charities and philanthropies? How would moving to a non-linear perspective, how could that help us? And definitely would change the kind of paradigm, that kind of a thinking. How could a better understanding of tipping points and phase transitions inform what we're doing? We have a little graphic there to help you think about that. And then integrative levels. How can a better understanding of integrative levels inform what we're doing? So we're going to take another 12 minutes to start posting up ideas here around this, and then we'll come back to discuss them once again. Let me put some time on the clock here. Off we go. If you have any challenges or problems, just let me know in the chat. Okay, welcome back. We've had a few people join since last time, so welcome to those people. And we are here on Mirrorball in the top right quadrant, thinking about shifting the paradigm, thinking the approach from the more linear one to one that's focused around emergence. And I've handed the board to you, Diliana. Do you want to? Is this what you're thinking of? These pink ones are you, aren't they?
Yes, I'm the purple pinky ones. And this time I started allocating them earlier, but then I ran out because lots of new great posters started coming out. I would love to start with the Humanize poster that is near the poetry and near the Emergent thinking card. Humanize those who use the system to change the system. Putting people in the system. I know we use a lot of jargony words and they really help in the systems thinking, but in the charity and the philanthropy space, I often go down to the root of who, for who, whose problems and whose money and for whose benefit. And would love to hear from whoever put that post-it or any of the post-its around poetry, human, people's stories are powerful. Or anyone who didn't put that post-it who wants to comment on humanizing systems in the context of philanthropy and charity.
I did put post note about the poetry, which Joss and Alan probably know well at this point. And it's an inquiry I've had for a couple of years now about what poetry does and how we can learn from that to help us better understand what systems do and how we work and relate to systems. So, for example, poetry creates resonance, or poetry, which happens in our energy fields as a community, a collective of change agents, or poetry uses silence to create a meaning and an impact, and also our powerful global grassroots movements use the power of silent witness and observation to hold powers to account, for example. And the Quakers are a good example of that peaceful witness and peaceful protest. So anyway, so that's something that I've been quite curious about, is the relationship between what poetry does and how that can help us understand what systems do and how we relate to systems. But then Joss, you mentioned something about the poetic, a poetic system, and that's like blowing my mind. Like
Autopoetic.
Autopoetic. I know it's someone else's term, but I heard poetic, and I'm now running. But like, there's something really, that's a very beautiful term. What does it look like to make? What are the poetics of systems change, or what does a poetic system look like? And for me, that's something about beauty and rhythm in that. That's really important when we think about how we pace ourselves and manage our expectations around how fast change happens.
Sorry, just to pick up on that point again. I mean, it did get me thinking quite a bit afterwards. Just that little comment that our job should be to make the system autopoetic. So by autopoiesis means self-creating or self-generating, which all living systems are, and that our job should not be to make the system better or they'll fix this or improve that, but how do you get it self-generating? I guess it's part of the whole regenerative idea, and that should be the primary focus, when typically it's not ready. But anyway, Andreas, want to jump in?
Oh, I think you might have clicked on leave.
Sorry.
Meeting. Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. One of the things that I liked about this, I haven't heard about poetic systems before, to be honest. I'm a practitioner, so I'm just learning constantly. But I'm trained as a journalist, so words matter for me. And one of the things that I have learned is that a model is not the end of things. It's just a step before the end in order to communicate. Because I have shared models and people don't understand the model, of course. But one of the things is that the model itself has helped me gain clarity for communication. And I think finding the models or thinking on the models as a way to find words has been my way of approaching this for journalism, for communications. And perhaps that's why I think about media as a medium for something else. And poetry is an addition, because journalism is quite boring sometimes, especially when there is a lot of negative bias in the news. So how can we embed all this kind of literature, cartoons, and all these principles in order to embed and create things for systems understanding, systems practice, systems thinking, and all these kind of elements. And for me, everything is just a medium for something else. And that's perhaps my approach for this. And basically, I would second what Diana was saying. Go back to the roots on very human level, the very basic stories, the stories that connect to the human experience on a very human level are the most complex and systemic in the many ways, which is a paradox.
Great, thank you very much for that.
Hey, can I add one more thing, Joss, on that? And also elevating the point that Alan made in the chat on the poets and the role of poets and different types of poets when we think about this. The very first systems innovation event that I went to was yours, I think, Josiane, on poetry and systems change. And it really drew me in with that different lens, different ways of being, bringing different types of our full human selves. And to me, poetry is this kind of work that reconnects and the reminder that we as people are discussing the role of philanthropy with the context of society, but also we as people are nature. We're not observing nature, doing something to nature. So yes, I love all of these links. I'll stop there, Joss.
Great, thanks. Maybe we'll pass it on to Alan if you'd like to pick up on anything.
Yeah, a couple of things to mention. Firstly, kind of building on what Andres was saying about kind of models and communication, which I very much agree with. But I also spotted a couple of post-its which were emphasizing the importance of testing and experimentation. There was one of those in the cluster around integrating levels, and then there was another one in the cluster around self-organization. I wonder if there's somebody who put one of those post-its, which has a green dot, my green dot next to it, might want to say a little bit about what they were getting at around experimentation and testing, please.
I had one of those, but if someone else wants to speak, as I have a
Go for it, Tim.
Yeah, so some of this, what I've seen in a lot of charities, particularly recently, is people don't always practice principles with their own volunteers and their own staff. And I find within the sector, it's almost seen as being charitable to go and work in the sector, that the salaries, for instance, are far lower than what you might get in industry, and it becomes more of a labor of love. And yet you see a lot of the execs take a lot of money home from some of these. I've seen recently in some of the sustainability work, there's charities that have been set up to respond to government bids, for example. And they undercut all the commercial side of things, pay the staff next to nothing from graduates coming out of university. And it might be a good opportunity for development for people, but it's very similar to what you've seen in the fashion industry before with some of the internships where they're completely unpaid, same in media. So there's a lot of this that I think needs to be looked at internally within the organization, to look at making sure people have the right environment to actually be effective at making that change. And you can test some of those principles internally at that level within your own organizations, to then see what works and self-organize to some degree so that then works externally. And I think I'm seeing more and more organizations actually shut out their volunteers and their staff from decision-making processes. Really good example, I was probably one of the shortest lived fellows of the RSA recently that joined before Christmas and left a few months ago, because they brought in forums and things for fellows, but they're moderating posts of anyone who's being at all negative about what they're doing. And it's a real shame, because I very much believed in their social purpose, but when you looked inside that organization, and as you see from the recent unionization and the workforce problems that they've had, they're not willing to make that change inside, that they're trying to then influence externally in their policy-making work. And sadly, I'm seeing that quite often, and I don't think it represents the behaviors that we should be seeing externally as well.
Yeah, good point. Great point. I mean, I reflected on it and what we do at SI and our team and how that works, and do we reflect, you know, what we're trying to be as an organization and network. So it's a really good principle. So Sine, would you like to pick up on anything here?
Yeah, really interesting stuff. I mean, just kind of following up on that, just very briefly, that kind of, I suppose, one thing that we in NCV do at least is the co-creation. It's something we very much advocate at different levels, including inside the organization, with the people and communities that charities work with, and then with decision makers in general. And I suppose linked to that, there are a couple of different places. I'm going to go for boring. I'm going to go for funding. And then there is also one in governance. So they're kind of different, they're dotted across different places. So there was about the Emergent area had a couple of places where it's talking about funding and this funding system and governance. So I'm quite interested on that. There was a post of Ivar's approach, and there was a kind of cluster of post-its around the need to change the governance and convening, and then on the other side, where there was the on the left hand corner, on that Emergent cluster, there was cluster of conversations around funding. So I don't know if anyone would like to say something more about those post-its. So there was one about the Ivar's post, or I thought it was quite interesting about the funding, the notes and levers as well.
Rachel?
Yeah, I didn't make one of the comments here, but I did somewhere else on the board make a comment about open funding models, and gave an example of an organization that has done a pretty good job of being transparent in their funding and also being community led in their grant decision making, and it has had really positive impacts on diversifying the recipients of their funding. And what I like is that not only have they been community led, but they have documented it well so that others can take on a similar model if interested.
Great. Maybe we'll stay going for the sake of time. I mean, it's interesting, this one around, you know, tipping points and phase transitions. If we're thinking about changing complex systems, it's kind of all about getting to this kind of tipping point where the system then kind of reinforces that new behavior and new dynamic, and you really get something taking off. And I had a quote recently that's, you know, a core competency of leaders within complex systems should be about understanding tipping points and the whole kind of dynamics that are going on here. And I don't think there's much real sensitivity to that. It's key to kind of emergence. If we want change, how do we get to these kind of critical places, these critical points, and what are the dynamics when we get there, and how do we fund for that, and how do we support that, and so forth. I think that can be kind of lacking in a lot of what we're talking about. But let's stay going. So that was around emergence and shifting away from linear thinking. We just have 30 so minutes left, so we're going to stay moving forwards. And next one is thinking about a more relational paradigm. What we're doing here, shifting away from a disconnected worldview of individual projects, organizations, and challenges, where we primarily focus on the organizing within those confines and so forth, and shifting to a more relational network view. How might we transition from forms of philanthropy and charity based upon boundaries and silos to ones that are designed to harness connectivity and work with networks? And we have a few, well, we go into that there around networks, but then you'll see a few other cards here. You know, this idea of decentralization, and we have a lot of technology coming to support that, and new ways of doing economies, decentralized economies and decentralized technology to be able to support a lot of new ways of doing things here. So I think this is an important part of it. How could a more decentralized view help to change the structure of philanthropy and charity? How could a more network perspective shape a new approach? Synergies. How can we put the parts together in the right way to get synergies and emergent? And interdependence, working with and working to better understand interdependence, which goes back to the idea of synergies also. So let's jump in, if you can, and start posting up our ideas there. We'll take about 10 minutes to do that before we come back again. Any questions or complications, please put them into the chat. Of course, this mirror board will be available afterwards. We haven't been able to touch upon everything, so you'll be able to come back and take a look at all of this. jump back in for the sake of time. But here we are talking about a more relational, networked approach. How could that understanding of systems we're dealing with inform, approaches to funding and charity? So who would like to go first? Maybe Didiana, should I check in on you?
Sure, yes. I would love to talk about steward ownership. Someone put it in all caps and in bold. If you're happy to share, I would love to find out more.
Hi, yeah, that's me. Yeah, I actually just recently learned about steward ownership. I am a young designer and I saw it emerging a lot on my Instagram feed and my LinkedIn feed. What I learned about it until now is that you not only have shareholders in companies, but you also have stewards who will be actually in charge that the mission and the values of companies are being kept, and that the money that is raised, like the income, is not only used for the business itself, but also for what it stands for. If anyone wants to add to it.
Yeah, I think you put it there. It's aligning the company's governance and financial practices with the core mission and its operation.
I'd like to add something as well, Joss, if that's okay.
Yep.
I've been observing and listening, and not really adding to the map, but really trying to see it as a more of an interconnected whole, and looking at the problem from the problem lens as well as from my own experience in the sector. Right now, the responding directly about that stewardship piece, there are ways of describing it now that are not just about shareholders or stakeholders, but about careholders. So that would be very close to this notion of stewardship in a more formal sort of corporate designation. But in communities, the grassroots communities, in cooperative styles of philanthropic organizations where the work to be done in communities is community driven, and the careholders are a group of community members themselves. They're the ones who have the most to lose and to gain if things don't work out. So they're the guardians of the initiative. So just some new nomenclature, shareholders, stakeholders, careholders.
Yeah, I think it goes back also to what we were talking about before in terms of like changing the way we show up and the way we convene and the roles there and who kind of has power and who gets to make what decisions. Great. Let's take action. So Alan, anything you'd like to pick up here?
Yeah, lots of things, but the one I'll focus on is around the word networked, again with the green dot. When the post-it talks about the ability to work with paradoxes and ambiguity, and that really resonated for me. So I wonder who put that down and whether they'd like to say a bit more about what it meant and why they think that is important for handling complexity. Please. I guess it's possible that it could be from somebody who has dropped off the call.
And this one here, figuring out how organizations should interface with each other and make sure those interfaces are working. Anybody want to pick up on that? Kim?
Can I just come on that? Sorry, is that okay? Because I picked that one as well, and I think I suppose my perspective is very different because I deal with those small charities every day, hundreds of them every year, and actually, NCVO is already a network of those organizations, all 17,000 of them. So there are already spaces and places where this happens. the interface is the challenge. So I don't know if anyone's got any brilliant ideas of how to make it better. I'm all ears. But it's I suppose what I'm saying is it's not that the charity sector certainly hasn't tried and kind of done themselves kind of soul searching as well, and thinking about how to change the system essentially.
Yeah, you get into a good point, because they may want to collaborate and connect and all, but often it comes back to resources. As you're noting, they're small organizations, they don't have that, unless there really is that great interface, that great network to connect. It's very difficult. We have that challenge with our hubs also. They're limited in resources, and then we talk about collaboration, but then actually it's very demanding to make that happen. So anybody want to pick up on that? I think that was you, Tim.
Yeah, and I think I've done quite a bit of work with SCDO as well, up in Scotland, and I think a lot of these organisations are really good for the networking perspective, but actually finding the right people to work with can be a big burden in terms of resource. I've seen that in a lot of the healthcare work I've been doing recently, that bits of the system are missing. For example, I put in earlier, as I recommended today, someone who needs an adapted bicycle, an old guy who's been doing a lot of cycling around Edinburgh, and I recommended a charity who do a lot more work with adapted bikes out in around Scotland. But then the bit that's missing is he can't get his bike transported to go there. So the whole service effectively breaks down, because the charity is providing the outings, the bikes, and the opportunities, but if people can't get there because of their disabilities, then we're not actually fixing the problem for people. And I think being able to understand, it's more than having databases of different charities and what they do, but it's actually having the social connections and those interfaces to understand you're not competing with each other as well. And then the other point on this is having shared services. I see it as running a small consultancy business myself, but there's things like marketing, fundraising for a charity is very difficult for smaller organizations, and potentially we can have these more distributed systems if we have some centralized facilities that are more than just providing the network, but actually provide some of the capabilities for them as well, and act as enablers.
Yeah, and that's going to start with actually getting some view of the network, isn't it? If we're not thinking in that way, that ecosystem way, or trying to understand the network, it's going to be difficult to find these missing gaps, as you say, and so forth. So Matilda, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Hey, thank you. Sorry, I have a very slow computer and I'm in a pub, so it's a bit noisy as well. Yeah, I guess the thing I wanted to point to with relational thinking is, I suppose we all come at kind of complexity thinking from the very linear thinking perspectives that we've been conditioned to work with and that our brain is best suited to. And so I think it's just the kind of point I wanted to nudge towards with my comment was something like, it's important to keep in mind the kind of, again, the high dimensionality essentially of what it means to think relationally. When you look at other nodes in a system, there's a lot of ways that they'll be different from each other. There's a lot of ways that they'll participate very differently and look at the issue in question differently and have different stakes. And I think it's very easy to flatten those dimensions and lose a lot of the kind of the dimensionality that would be helpful to keep in mind as you're doing this. Because I think when we talk about systems being when we talk about, for example, an issue that's part of a larger system, it's easy to forget that we're actually looking at a bunch of different embedded systems, right, at different levels, and that these take the shape of quite different aspects of reality in a way. So I think just bearing in mind that all these nodes will have very different shapes is a good way to prevent ourselves from falling back into the limitations of linear thinking. That's essentially all I was meaning to point to, and I suspect that all of you will have better things to say about that than myself.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great point. And it's about different types of relationships, isn't it? And the different types of networks that form in a system. And that if you want one of these autopoietic, regenerative, healthy systems, it's different types of networks, isn't it? And I often note that when we start talking about money and philanthropy, we start to look at it in that way, in the context of money, and thinking, oh, what can we do with this money? And we flatten out and we forget about all the other networks and all the other types of value, all the other types of motives and so forth. So I think this systems approach to funding or systemic funding is definitely a multi-dimensional one, where you recognize that money is just one dimension to that network, and there are many other dimensions, aren't there? And we have to consider those. Yeah, Sinead?
Yeah, can I just, sorry, I can't find the, sorry, I'm
It's
too
fine.
old
Go
to
for it.
work with Zoom, so I can't find the hands up. I normally use Teams. So anyway, what I wanted to say about that is, like, you know, is it exactly, sorry, I lost my train of thought. So what was the last thing you said, Joss?
Yeah, just saying the funding has to be one dimension of all these different kind of types of relationships.
Yeah, so I'm kind of even challenging us thinking, we should be thinking about resource. So when we're talking about funding, just cross over and say resource, because, you know, us humans can do loads of things. You know, there is a power in that as well. It doesn't need necessarily to be the money. So from the philanthropic perspective as well, perhaps thinking beyond the money, there are different ways that you can kind of have an impact.
Yeah, and I think about the word value and taking that in a very holistic way, right? I think it's important. So Paula, a quick word before we move on.
Yes, I put into the chat a couple of examples of networks that happen in Canada with regard to the philanthropy and international cooperation sector. Some of them are home-based charities or philanthropic organizations that are connected through networks through their regional councils. And the point of having these councils is to see what, you know, we're all doing, see where the funding is available, either partially from our federal government, so the Canadian government, as opposed to you know, regional or provincial government. And also private sector stakeholders. So the notion is not just to have you know, individual pockets of people working in silos. Connecting, this has been happening for many years now, and it's effective in the sense that there's constant learning, unlearning, relearning of what it means to be a good global citizen. Decolonizing mentalities with regards to how to provide and support international cooperation, and also allows people a forum to be able to share their experiences. So there's a rich network, an interconnected network of networks that's happening in Canada. And I'm not a member of government, so I have no skin in the game with regard to this. I just have observed and participated in one organization that is a part of these networks and sees the value in having this networked approach. Additional to the networking that's happening in the organizations internationally with which we're supporting. So they themselves have their own networks, and that cross network communication is very helpful.
Great, thanks for that. I love the idea of hubs too, like this thing where many different parties can connect, and you know, as you're saying, they're not in their own space, but they're able to create these spaces, these hubs that form networks and allow people to kind of connect across different systems and so forth. Let's again, we just have 5 minutes left, so we're going to, or 5-10 minutes left, so we're going to move quickly on to the final section, where we're talking about a more adaptive and evolutionary approach to thinking about how we move forwards and how we think about the future and the challenges and how we address them. We're often thinking in kind of a fixed planning approach. And I know we've touched upon it once or twice already, that I think the thinking is already starting to change, that, you know, giving people money and expecting them to know what they're going to do with it and the outcomes they're going to get in a few years is a little bit unrealistic. And I think that thinking is already starting to change, but a much more iterative and adaptive approach to development is certainly needed when we're dealing with complex systems. So we're going to jump into the last section here. You'll see cards around cybernetics. How can we use that? evolution as a process, and game theory, and finally this one about resilience and anti-fragile systems. How could a better understanding of resilience shape what we do? So we just have just under 5 minutes to post up some ideas, and then we'll come back and have a quick discussion before wrapping up. Important part of this also is this whole aspect of learning, that actually learning becomes a very core aspect in systems innovation because of the complexity of the challenges you're dealing with, and need to get a kind of not just individual learning, but actually learning at an aggregate level, at kind of a network level, so that they can really start to figure out the nature of the challenge and how they can work together. So just to add that there. Okay, unfortunately, we're drawing to a close with the time that we have, but we'll have to just see if there's one or two things people would like to pick up on here. Alan, is there anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, just briefly, I saw there was a mention of incentives. And for me, that's super important because, you know, the thing that makes systems what they are is actors and the ways that actors behave and the ways that actors interact. And understanding kind of the drivers of individuals and organizations' behaviors seems super important. And I think there's a, you know, sometimes there's a kind of too big a gap between systems thinking and behavioral approaches. And I think kind of combining systems thinking and behavioral approaches to understand how actors behave and how they might behave differently can be very fruitful. So
Yeah,
that was one thing.
Yeah, it's a good point. We get caught up in the bigger picture and we don't necessarily, when we need to focus on the individuals and their behaviors and so forth, we need to kind of integrate that also, I think. Yeah. Anyone else? Didiana, Sine?
Just want to say, yeah, that's a brilliant point that Alan just said about, and I think the importance perhaps to have both of those perspectives. So remember to zoom in and zoom out so that you see the whole picture, so to speak. And even on this board, sometimes, you know, I might be thinking small, you might be thinking big. So actually our perspectives are quite different. So having that space, I suppose, as well for the kind of adaptive, being able to adapt your thinking response to another.
Yeah, zooming in, zooming out, and seeing the forest and the trees and how they interrelate, I think is ultimately what system thinking is about. Anyone else? Didiana, do you want to have the last?
I might just elevate one of these teal post-its that emerged on funding teams and people rather than projects. And I met someone, Sini and I actually were in the room, and met someone who works in housing and set up this organization where the public life doesn't involve the public, and started paying citizens of local communities a salary for 1 year to work on the local behavior problems and the incentives, with the idea that actually who knows best, and we can analyze someone else's behaviors and try to tweak these problems as these externals, us versus them, versus looking at like who are the embedded living and breathing members of the system who can have a lot of agency. So I just wanted to elevate that. Going back down to the who within the systems and the interconnectedness.
Yeah, it goes back to that point of like convening. Who's been part of this conversation and what are the incentives around it and so forth. And system change invariably involves bringing new people into the conversation and into the dynamic in new ways. Okay, so our time is up. In fact, we're a little bit over time, but that was super to have all your contributions and have that conversation. It's quite a rich board here, not just stickies, but also we've got maps and we've got snippets from across the internet. So thanks a lot for sharing that. And we're going to draw.
Make one last comment.
Yeah, go for it. Jim.
Very quickly. I just think it's interesting as we were going around the board that someone had put in, it wasn't me, the notion of the inner development goals as the inner change that needs to happen for the outer change to be effective and long lasting. And I noticed that as I was going around the board, every one of those instances, I could apply the inner development goals. And that's why at the end, when we looked at resilience, the perspective taking it just struck me as a practitioner of the inner development goals as well as using it in my work. I just find that it's important. So you'll notice just below that, as we're, as we come to the closure of the circle, that I included a little bit more detail about what something along those lines, where thinking involves being able to leverage this this emerging way of awareness of systems and complexity thinking and perspective taking, and even future foresight management of the way that we want to have our collective futures evolve. So just if you move your scope a little down, you'll see how the circle ends up, because that's where we started on the circle.
Okay, okay, there you have it. The full inner development goals. Okay, maybe someone else wants to quickly say what was one of their key insights. One interesting thing to me was that we talked about it here about how general awareness, more broad awareness, would have an amazing influence here. And I guess the point that maybe sometimes the solutions or the answers are outside the box. Like if we had that broader awareness across society, it would actually lift all boats in some way, wouldn't it? So I found that an interesting takeaway for me. Anyone else, any like vast insight you had today you'd like to share?
Just wanted to say I really wanted to have post-its on the cybernetics because I don't really understand that and the context with charities. So something for the next time, I suppose.
Yep. Anyone else? Any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Well, it can take us to my last thoughts. If you go to the feedback, I've actually been behind the scenes actively trying to synthesize all of these conversations and to putting them in post-it notes. So I kind of took up the space where the comments are supposed to go, so feel free. But these were the main topics of conversation as we went through. And then there's the links that everybody put in the Zoom chat as well of additional resources. So here's some things to reflect on and some additional resources for you as well. So
great. Well done, Sarah. Thanks a lot for that. So there you have them. And someone was asking about the outcome. We will, coming out of this, do a synthesis of this to try and take the key insights, the key points that were voted upon there, and turn those into a graphic to be able to share back with you, so you'll have something to take away. That will we'll email that to you and also put it on social media and in the network in the coming week or two, so you'll have that to take away. And hopefully that was insightful. Hopefully you know, it helped you look at this in different ways, and you have something to take away in terms of a systems approach to philanthropy and charity. And you might be able to apply that in your work. You might be able to share it with others, as someone else was saying in the chat here, that they're going to try and do one of these co-creations in their organizations. But hopefully you take this back and you find ways to use it in a beneficial way in your organizational work. Here, just a little bit of feedback. How did you find today's session, the format? We've been innovating and adapting on this format for a couple of years now, having the coaches, having the dot voting, different things, and the cards and so forth. Would love to know if you actually had any additional ideas. You could post up a sticky there about how we can make this better in the future, or you'd like to vote on the left here as it wasn't as helpful as you would have hoped, on the right as you found it very useful. Okay, we're going to wrap up there. The board will be available, so you can come back here and you can look through all of this, and there's links there and resources and so forth, and hopefully you manage to connect with others here, and maybe you'll have follow-on conversations. We'll hopefully see you in the SI network and at future events. We're going to post this recording back into the network also.
And just one more thing, if this got you really, really fired up and you want to reach back out, feel free to reach out to me or Joss if you're interested in coaching or being a challenge holder, or just want to see where this could evolve to. So
good point. We do these on a regular basis, these co-creations, and we also do longer labs. We've got those coming up. So if you have ideas for challenges, we're always open to that and love to hear from them. We'll wrap up there. Thank you very much to the coaches. Thanks to everyone else for joining, and well done to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Yeah. Thank you.